I want to introduce Richard Kessler, who's the Executive Dean, College of Performing Arts and Dean at Mannes School of Music. Alysia Lee, founder and artistic director of Sister Cities Girl Choir and program supervisor for the Fine Arts Education for the Maryland State Department of Education. Tim O'Leary, general director of the Washington National Opera, and Alan Pierson, artistic director of Alarm Will Sound. And I want to welcome back to the panel, Krishna and Alan, who both just gave presentations to participate in this conversation also. So it's a great panel and great presentations, folks. Maybe first of all, thank you all for participating today. It's been thus far a really interesting day, and I know it's going to continue to be that. Maybe just a good place to start would be I'd like to kind of go around the virtual room here and get your, each of you have a chance to respond to what you heard in these presentations. And then I'm going to get to asking each of you individually in your own work, in your own lives, how you're thinking about these issues, obviously. But I'd like to start with a response to what you've actually heard today thus far. And so maybe I'm going to start, if I can, I'll start at the top of my screen with Richard. Richard.
Thank you, Fred. And thanks to the presenters. Really enjoyed it. And it is setting off a lot of fireworks inside my head right now. I'll try to grab a couple of them as they fly by. Response to some of the things that I heard. I think I'm really struck by the issue of fear. I'm really struck by the issue of risk and the very, very poor job our field as a whole has done in supporting risk, incentivizing risk. It's really been the opposite. I think that is extremely important. This was an observation, this was a sort of additional thought. I do think that our field has been, it's connected to one of the last things that Alan said. Alan talking about the artists and the power that the artists have in this, and that I think that I agree with that. And I think a lot of the key is to find ways to unlock that. But I think that there's also been a challenge to this field in that it's been really obsessed and overly centered in large organizations, orchestras, opera companies. And I think that when I think of many of the things that chamber ensembles are doing, that and the work that these ensembles are doing, when you talk about risk and you talk about invention, when you go to the showcases at the Chamber Music America conference and you see these groups perform over 2 or 3 days, these young artists often, and they can be of any age actually, are doing the most incredible things. Now, granted, they don't have to support 100 people or 200 people or 300 people or an $80 million or $40 million budget. Nevertheless, what you see is that they are inventing and reinventing themselves all the time. We tend to overlook this. We tend to overlook the lessons of it. It's sort of like they kind of don't exist when people, we get press pieces, and I'll stop with this because you can see that if I don't stop, I'll just keep going. There are press pieces out there that talk about, a $1,000 surplus or a $1,000 deficit in an orchestra budget. So I think that there are other things to focus on. I think there are other people to focus on. And I think that there are incredibly positive things that have been occurring in our field that are, to a large degree, artist-driven, that I would urge all of us to look more closely at and to learn lessons and hopefully grow in its effectiveness.
Thanks, Richard. Alysia.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so proud to be a Peabody alum and so glad that this event is happening. In listening, it reminded me of something someone told me once about being a musician, that you really have to take on, they learned this lesson from a football coach. And he said that the best way to be a great football coach is to know that football is everything and that football doesn't matter at the same time. And I wonder if the classical music field could start to think about that as well. The pandemics, and I want to call them, I always say pandemic with an S at the end instead of a C, because yes, COVID-19, but also anti-Black racism has really come to such a forefront for us. Also, this economic crisis, we've got people leaving the workforce in droves. And also then the environmental crisis, which is really much more of a topic that people younger than me are greatly, that's their number one concern. So we still have these 4 pandemics happening all at the same time. I'm just so intrigued by the fact that in the middle of these 4 pandemics where the performing arts is thriving, but not the classical performing arts. How does that happen? People are driving in droves to be comforted by art. And how are we missing the connection to connect to people? I loved hearing Jack Hagee's story about using Happy Birthday as a way of kind of shifting the atmosphere in the air. And it's so great. But the lesson there is really about shifting music to a place where the value of collectivism is evident, where everyone can participate. And so that's really the question when we're thinking about removing access barriers. I love that oftentimes when we're talking about change, it's much easier for us to kind of divert our attention to the areas outside of our immediate area of control. So people automatically start talking about solving the issue of diversity with education programs instead of thinking about the things in their actual purview to shift and change. So I wonder if we could think about equity, if equity, which I'm defining equity for what I think it is an opportunity to engage the general public or engage our communities, not just in a way where they're informed about what we're doing, and not just in a way where they're consulted about what we're doing, but in a way where they have an active decision-making in the priorities that are set forth by our arts institutions. And that is the change we want to see that creates the grand participation, because the arts are thriving in this time. And I think, we've got to figure out why the classical sector is not able to tap into all of these incredible gains.
Thanks, Alysia. Tim.
Fred, thanks so much for the invitation and the panel. And Alysia, thank you for that great set of questions. I agree with what Richard said. It's been sort of setting off fireworks in my brain to hear everybody. I really want to thank fellow panelists, Krishna and Alan, for their examples and challenges. So I run the Washington National Opera. I'm in my 3rd year doing so. I came from a much smaller, nimbler opera company, the Opera Theater of St. Louis. So I'm in my 3rd year here. Half of it's been the pandemic. So I spent the first year figuring out, this is a much larger ship, slower to turn, bigger, gears to shift. And then suddenly, like Krishna, finding myself running the thing in the midst of a totally changed context. So actually, the thing that struck me was what Joel said about, the invitation to direct an opera and this like preconceived notion of opera. To me, opera is actually just an ancient technology that combines music, words, and story to convey like our deepest fears and greatest hopes, and actually to create social cohesion and bonding in a group of people who experience the big emotions together. And so I actually had the chance to talk to one of the brilliant commentators in our field, Garrett McQueen, yesterday. He's coming here to do some work with us. And he began his whole talk by using music as a verb, music king, which is a concept from many indigenous cultures. Music doesn't exist as a noun, but rather a verb. And I have to say, I just experienced it because we did all kinds of beautiful things during the pandemic shutdowns. We had a truck. We had the pop-up opera truck that brought, the joy of live performance throughout the greater metropolitan area. We commissioned an opera for families and children based on the elephant and piggy characters, and took that thing on a truck all over the greater DC area and engaged with people. And yet the experience that we just had, which was welcoming the audience back into the opera house at full scale, the orchestra, the chorus, right? Yes, this is a 19th century construction based on patriarchy and monarchy and all these bits of baggage that we inherit, and yet it's a powerful medium. It creates something. Adam Grant wrote a piece in the New York Times that you probably read about collective effervescence. So I think digital has been great. We have had a natural experiment in what we can do to innovate in the digital realm. We commissioned and will present soon the premiere a virtual reality, opera. So all of that is fabulous, except that actually the value proposition, I believe, whether you go back millennia or today, of what we have to offer is a live experience that causes people to feel closer to one another and can bridge differences through shared experience of emotion. I really appreciate what Alan had to say about the commercial presenters, because for all the talk of innovation, people in the commercial sector never tried to innovate without capital. And we in the not-for-profit sector long ago developed the idea that we should just run break-even budgets. And we've allowed our donors to think that that's good enough. And of course, before the pandemic, there was a big old movement in our field to capitalize institutions and understand that innovation requires capital. And that's been my greatest priority as I've used the time during, the lack of performances every evening and weekend, is to model out the next many years for this organization, to figure out how we do all the things that we've just been talking about. Reinventing the idea of the art form. I think it's actually getting back in touch with the oldest ideas of this art form. But to do it and to do it effectively, it's going to take innovation capital. And that means redefining and actually, Alan, I'm going to add to my list for-profit subsidiaries. I hadn't really spent enough time on that one yet. But it involves redefining the value proposition with those who create the capital for us. And I have to say also, I deeply appreciated what Krishna had to say about essentially the social compact within an arts organization. We all read a lot of great books during this shutdown time. The best thing I read was Brene Brown's Dare to Lead, and her concept of power, right? The old model, which Krishna was describing, is the power over model. And it is not going to be effective any longer. But forever, there have been leaders in the other categories, the power with and the power to model. We will have to change the social compact within our organizations. I was on one of these panels with a colleague right in the middle of the worst of it, when we were all dealing with furloughs and layoffs and shutdowns. And a colleague said in one of these panels, I didn't furlough or lay off anybody because people are more than their labor. And I just thought that is the way to redefine the social compact. And of course, the younger generations who are coming into the workforce are going to have tolerance for nothing but a redefined social compact that brings in all the values of equity, diversity, inclusion, and rethinking our organizations. So, Fred, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to get energized about all this. And I agree with what Alan said. It's so great to look beyond just all of this reacting and begin planning again, but in a new way.
Thanks, Tim. So I'm going to come back to Krishna and Alan Brown. We got two Alans, so Alan Brown in a minute, but I want to go to Alan Pierson. Alan, so you are involved with a smaller organization. We had Brad Balliet this morning from Dakota, and so one of the things I want to eventually get to is what can large organizations learn from small organizations. But what your response to what you heard?
Yeah, man. First of all, thank you to all the people who've spoken and the panelists. So many great ideas, and my mind also is firing in 1,000 different directions. And I'll try to be concise right now and just pick up a few themes that I heard a number of times in these talks that I've found particularly inspiring. One is, Tim, something you were just talking about, which is the power of live performance and of bringing people together in a live performance, which is so fundamental to what we do and why we do what we do. That's been on my mind a ton recently as we start to have live performances again. And I feel that in tension with something that Alan was talking about in his presentation, which hit me hard, which is the waning interest in conventional performance, which is so important for us to be tuned into. And along with that is the power that commercial presenters have to move fast, to see where interest is going and be there. And so something that I think about a ton and am thinking about now in reaction to these talks is how do we as arts organizations and as arts leaders, bring those experiences of that are the heart of what we do, which are live performance and bringing people together in live performance, but challenging ourselves to do those in ways that recognize where the culture is, in terms of the kinds of events that resonate with people, and the kind of innovation and quick innovation that's required to create them. And, Fred, as you mentioned, I run a small organization, and, am lucky to work with a group of musicians who, when we came together now, like 25 years ago, were really excited to be unconventional and embrace the kind of cultural democracy that Alan was talking about, and play all different kinds of music, and not just be a group of performers on stage, but do all different kinds of performance practice, and be, actors and singers as well as musicians. So I feel really lucky about that, because I think that kind of agility is really helpful in grappling with some of the challenges that we've talked about. But there was a theme that came up both in Jake's talk and also Krishna in your talk, about the importance of accepting risk, and creating practices which give us room to fail, and encourage us to take on projects that might not be successful. And that's something that Alarm Will Sound has been really trying to do a ton of before the pandemic, but especially in these in the recent year and a half. And it's been interesting, and I think to me a sign of success with this, that I feel like we, as I was talking about a few minutes ago, being a group of musicians who are used to doing things that are uncomfortable and challenging, and especially, and now in this moment, grappling not just with new ways of making music and new kinds of performance practice, but also challenging ourselves to be an anti-racist organization, and to figure out what kinds of work we can do to be more inclusive. It's been interesting to come upon moments where we do create the kind of first, where we embark on projects that don't always come to fruition and that aren't always successful, and making space for that has felt really important. And also, what Jawale said about the difference between a safe space and a comfortable space is something that we've been thinking a lot about. And I know in Alarm Will Sound, there has been what has felt like some very productive discomfort in recent months as we challenge ourselves to do that. And it's been an interesting experience in the organization, going from being a group of players who because of the players' great comfort in doing things that many musicians find uncomfortable, in terms of how we play together, I think we have sort of gotten used to being able to challenge ourselves while still being comfortable. And it's been interesting to now, in like the last year and a half or two, discover there are ways that we can challenge ourselves that are not comfortable, and that has felt both challenging and productive. So those are all themes that really connected with me from the presentations and the comments. And I'm really happy to be here talking with you all about these very, very important issues. So thank you.
Thanks, Alan. So I want to give Alan, the other Alan, and Krishna, maybe we'll start with Krishna, a chance to either reflect on what you heard from the other presenters or each other, or what you've heard in this conversation. Krishna, you want to?
Sure. I'll keep it brief since I had so much time before, and I'm trying to order my thoughts because I'm getting so much good vibes here from everything that people are saying. I also want to say that Alan Brown and I did not coordinate our presentations beforehand, but Alan, man, everything you said, I can subscribe 100%. I also want to mention that I had a really touching moment listening to Jawale, because she's talking about not invalidating your life's experiences when you get into the traditional arts training. And I think that's really important. And it ties in with what Alan Brown also said, which is we have to get to a place where we accept all cultures as equal, and all, artistic high cultures are equal, and all music is equal. There should not be any more a separation between this is classical, this is jazz, this is, I hate the term world music, and spoiler alert, I'm half Indian, but I still hate the term world music because my last name, Thiagarajan, is the Beethoven of South Indian classical music, except nobody in the world knows that. So it's not world music when you got 50 million Indian people knowing what that means, and nobody in the rest of the world does. And by the way, I have no connection with the man other than I have his last name. So, but putting that all together, I think one of the things that I'm really wanting to promote in our field is that we need to move, especially in the orchestras and the traditional performing arts, we need to move away from an old style manufacturing mentality where we're manufacturing concerts to a creative in-house studio mentality. We are actually a studio. My hall, Benaroya Hall, is a production studio. And I have the ability to bring things to an audience, and then they vote thumbs up or thumbs down if they like it or if they don't like it. So that's the one point I feel like I'm hearing more of, that people are understanding that that's important. And I believe it's really important. I want to also expand the conversation a little bit, because one of the reasons we are not taking a lot of risks, and this is what Richard Kessler brought up, the idea of risk taking. I think we can all agree one of the reasons we're not taking a lot of risk is because we're all beholden to a very traditional funding model. And in that traditional funding model, if we're lucky, we've got 50% earned income through tickets, which, by the way, during COVID was a horrible ratio, but pre-COVID was considered a gold standard for doing things right. And then 50% or more is contributed revenue. And those contributors, let's face it, more often than not have very traditional ideas of what good means, what excellent means. And the biggest problem that I think we need to begin to understand and address is, for the last 30 years, that nonprofit model has really functioned to amplify a European-centric cultural leadership model. And that's one of the reasons why we did not have a high influx of patrons of color. There are lots of patrons of color with significant financial means, but they're questioning whether they are supposed to keep funding the traditional model. And so we have to change what we present, change how we think about culture and art, and when we then have to bring in people that have a very different viewpoint that help us become investors in the new future. Those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Krishna. Alan, anything you want to add to what you've heard? You're on mute.
Thanks. Alysia, I just want to say you're doing amazing work. And, you are walking the walk of cultural democracy. And I think in some ways we all have so much to learn from you and your folks who are doing this work. And there are others around the country who are doing this. Well, I just want to throw it back to you, Fred, because, we go on and on at symposiums, and I've been talking about the need for innovation and risk for maybe 15 years. I gave a keynote speech at the Orchestra League conference 7 years ago. It was the title, "If It Ain't Broke, Break It." Maybe some of you, we keep talking about this, but maybe there's a way that conservatories, plural, and orchestras and opera companies, plural, could collaborate on creating sort of greenhouse sites for risk-taking. I have proposed this in the past, and very quietly I'm approached by orchestra managers saying, "Hey, we'd love to be a greenhouse site. Just underwrite our bottom line." But if funders were invited to create, essentially remove the financial risk and create a couple of greenhouse sites and collaborate with artist training programs, and collaborate with each other and across disciplines funds and actually create laboratories. I don't know too many funders who could say no to a proposal from a consortium of organizations and conservatories, because we just never do that. So why can't we do that?
So let me, I think it's a great point and great comment. And I want to sort of put the spotlight back on myself and my colleague, my fellow dean here, Richard Kessler. So by the time they leave our place and they get to your places, it's too late. They, you know, our job, I think a lot of the failure, and I've said this for, you know, since I got into the academic side of things I came from the orchestra world, that, you know, and one of the things that brought me actually to the academic side was because of this, the very interest in this issue about how are we going to change the way artists think about what they do. Because we're talking a lot about institutions, but I will tell you that one of the biggest challenges is that people are, as they're trained as musicians or performing artists, whatever their discipline may be, they are singularly focused, and we all understand why. We all understand why. But certainly what we're trying to do here with the new curriculum that we launched is surround the core skills that people need with a much broader set of entrepreneurial skills, you know, and these are not optional skills. These are skills, these are things that people have to take at Peabody. And I'm not gonna lie to you and pretend that it's been a smooth road all the way. It's a culture change. It's a mindset change. But I put the blame, if there's, I put it back on the institutions that are training students, because I think it has to, and blame is the wrong word, but I think it has to start there. I think it has to start there. And I think partnerships with professional organizations is critical, but I think it's got to start with curriculum change also in the institutions that are training people. And as I said, changing the mindset. Richard, I know you you're dealing with the same issues. You're doing what, I'd love to hear sort of what you're thinking about this.
Well, I'm here over 10 years now, and I came in having been a teaching artist, ran some organizations. I came in with the mission to essentially begin to train artists as creative artists first. In the classical field, that's a problem. I also oversee a 300 student jazz school, and we have a 250 student drama school as well. We felt that actually we were not training our students actually for the, for me, the fundamental question is, what do our graduates need to know, understand, and be able to do? It's very much a K-12 question. It's like the seminal K-12 question. It's not asked at the higher education so much. Sometimes it's more like, what am I going to tell them to do? What do I think that they should do? Not what will they actually need to do? And we have a problem. Alan touched upon this briefly, I believe. We have Alan Brown. We're training classical musicians to a large degree, especially the orchestra and opera, as core artists. A little less opera, more orchestra. They're core artists. They're interpreters. Classical music up until the 20th century was a creative form. The gods of classical music, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, Mahler, Bernstein, Mingus, whomever you want to throw in, Meredith Monk, they're all creative artists. They all improvised, they all composed, they all performed, they were all entrepreneurial, they were all educators. And what happened is we get to this point in the 20th century where we focused in on them being essentially creating core artists, CORPS, who were interpretive. We're told that you perform and you don't compose, and we rejected composition and we rejected creativity, and we ghettoized and made us made into very small and sideline the working in community. And what happens is you basically build this thing on this weird value system that emerges out of the 20th century that does no favors for our students. And yes, the unicorns can go out and do these things, but you're essentially, and also, by the way, every one of these students can compose, and every one of these students can improvise, and every one of these students can have deep human agency, but you're basically telling them that put them in a box and you tell them they perform violin. And I think we've been trying to address this, and I've been fighting it out, and I use the term very carefully. And to tell you the truth, it's been extremely difficult. I'll say one last thing. I see Krishna has his hand up. I think what I see in the field is essentially the desire, the conservatory-oriented field, higher ed, is essentially essentially an unwillingness to attack the core values and curriculum, and to, from the periphery, try to wrap around with other things that are entrepreneurship and all sorts of other stuff. At a certain point in time, and I've only found this because of all the incremental work that we've been doing, every year going further, every year another teacher hired, every year another course. We've launched over 100 courses. We brought on degree programs. We replaced the Orion Quartet with the Jack Quartet. I mean, I could go down the list of stuff. We brought in Alan Pierson. What happens is at some point you have to get to that historic core traditional curriculum, and that thing needs to be exploded. And that means that it is going to be an incredibly discomforting and kind of drag experience with the community that you're supposed to run. And I'll leave it at there because Krishna had his hand up.
Krishna, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, just so you just reminded me of the days when I, many moons ago, was a young piano student at, well, forget the schools, but I did a bachelor's, master's, and a doctorate. And I was just realizing, you know, in my doctorate, it was all about the dissertation of the change of the sonata form at the turn of the 20th century. I loved the topic, you know, Alban Berg, Opus 1, great, awesome, cool stuff. But once I got into the workforce, it wasn't really particularly useful to me, even while I was teaching mostly young kids who were learning the piano. And I was always wondering why we don't have, and maybe this exists today, so correct me if it does, why don't we have a project to graduate where it says, program 4 concerts, hire your own orchestra to work with you, and then as a condition, get 100 of your friends to attend each of those, and program it in such a way that they want to come. Because I think what maybe everybody here knows, but some of us have a hard time remembering, when we played our student recitals, we had, you know, especially the 10 o'clock ones, because we had so many rotations at IU Bloomington, you know, there were 10 people in that audience, and you were basically playing for your mom, your teacher, your girlfriend, and, you know, 2 best friends, and that was about it, plus the stagehands who had to be there because of regulation. What about that idea of having that as part of a degree program?
Alysia.
Yeah, I'd like to share just, you know, at the State Department, I oversee and also help and support all Maryland local school systems, arts education programs as the policymaker and key strategist. I'm also the president-elect of my professional association. So I'm in contact and I can offer just a little bit of the picture of the national and statewide view for arts education. These changes that you all are talking about, these are the same things we talk about. And what's happening, like most pieces of change, is changes happening at the grassroots level. The P to 12 public school space has already started this process of transformation. Our latest iteration of the National Core Arts Standards specifically center the creative process as the center of all arts learning. And what we're thinking of there, I'm reminded of Lucille Clifton's famous quote, you know, we can't imagine what we can't create, is that by really allowing students to be a part of the creative process, that we're giving them, number one, the tools for transformation for all of society. So you're welcome for that, everybody. But also, right, we're getting them to think at the highest level of thinking. The new Bloom's taxonomy charts have create, right? Because when they switch the nouns for the verbs, we now have create at the very top. So this has become for us, the center of all education learning, is that the center and the nucleus of innovation that we need, right, for our social ills and for our technology ills and our environmental ills, really can be found in the arts classroom. In addition to the fact that we see so much space in the arts classroom for the very shifts in pedagogy that we want to see. So I like to think beyond the what of what people are learning. And this might be this might not be helpful, but instead of thinking about the classes that we can bring in, I really think it's about thinking about how are we changing and shifting the people that we listen to make the decisions, and then the approach that we have to learning. When I go into a classroom that is centering the creative process, but the teacher has not adopted decolonized methods of teaching, so the students are not a part of setting the norms for how the class operates. The students don't get to help to develop the success criteria and define success, and the students' voices aren't heard in terms of what are we examining here? And this is for P to 20 for it to examine. When that's not in place, it doesn't matter what the courses are. It doesn't matter that you have a Black composer course or that you're allowing students to create and compose. All of that innovation and all of that thought goes out the window because of the pedagogy still is not supportive of that message. That's that, for theater folks, that's that subtext creeping in. The subtext is still, you don't matter. What you have to say is not important. And we're filling the room with people who are dead and gone instead of the live, living, creative beings that are in front of us. I just want to make one comment just to tap onto what Joelle said about how she had internalized this message from institutions that her lifetime, her family that's why family's so valuable. Our lifetime trajectory in the arts, she had internalized that it didn't matter because her institutions told her that was the case. And so when we begin, that is an opening and a conversation begins. But what we're doing by not being able to catalyze all of these things is we're missing out on opportunities for genius. We're missing out. We're missing out on opportunities for innovation. All of the solutions to what we have are all present, and they're all present, not with us actually, but in the minds of our students who are the most impacted by the work.
Alan and Tim?
Yeah, man, I want to resonate something that Alan was talking about and Alysia too, which is this idea of a laboratory that would be like a school professional partnership, which would create a space for new kinds of music making to be developed, and new kinds of performance practice to be developed. I think that is such a powerful idea. It's something that's been on my mind. I think it should happen. I would love to be part of making that happen. And I think that having a laboratory like that, which can take on projects, encourage creativity, Alysia, resonating with what you said, like allowing students, making a space for students to be a part of the creative process. I think we as a field have so much to gain from that. And obviously music education has a lot to gain from that, because Richard, as you were saying, we live in a world where it's not nearly enough for musicians to come out of school being able to play their instruments really well. Like that is the tiniest part of having a thriving career in the arts. And so creating a laboratory space where students can be encouraged to bring that kind of creativity, imagine new kinds of music making and new kinds of performances, and have that work supported and encouraged and mentored. Man, I think there's like so much that we as a field have to gain from that. And I'll share one personal story along those lines, which is that the beginnings of Alarm Will Sound, which is the ensemble that I run, was at the Eastman School of Music. And the way that we came into existence is that Eastman was at that point, funding the Institute for Music Leadership, which was, this is back in the late 1990s, as a sort of first wave of understanding that training musicians needed to involve entrepreneurship. And so we came to the administration and said, hey, we have an idea for an ensemble, and we want to do these concerts. This is why this work is really innovative and fresh, and we would love it if the school supported it. And much to our shock and surprise, Jim Underkoffler, who was then the head of the school, said that sounds great and gave money for that. And this ensemble, this organization, wouldn't exist without the support that the Eastman School gave to that entrepreneurship, back 20 years ago. And so I so passionately believe in the idea of creating more laboratories like that at schools around the country, with mentorship, with partnership with outside arts organizations and leaders, to create not only those new artists, but those new ways of art making that will help our field endure and thrive in the years ahead.
So I want to get to questions that we promised to take from folks that are listening in on all of this. And I've got about 10 other questions I could ask you to go deeper on all of these things, but we got to get to those folks also. But Tim, do you have something you wanted to, before we go to that?
Well, the only thing I want to say, I'm always the most insufferably optimistic person on one of these panels. But I've got to play my part here, because there's been so much discussion of like all the fear that our field is experiencing and all the risk of loss. We have just been through such a period of unbelievable loss. But one of the things that has happened, and I think, Krishna gave us an inspiring example of it, is this openness and optimism, and the sense, the artistic director who I'm lucky to work with, Francesca Zambello, she's been all about creating cultural democracy her entire career. She's thrilled at the opportunities that we have now to remake the concept of an opera season and have not a completely blank slate, but let's say a new horizon on which to build. So I feel it very much in my own organization and throughout the field. Everyone's exhausted and traumatized, but also open and optimistic. So I'm here to say it's not going to happen in 1 year, but we are going to meet these challenges. The field is going to change. And I think it'll all be for the better. If you would have told me when I started my career, I've only worked in opera my whole career, what a ridiculous choice. But if you'd have told me at the beginning that there'd be this kind of inflection point when I was 23 years in, I'd be thrilled to know that I was heading toward it. So I'm excited. All right, let's get to the questions.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, Lauren, what do we have from our participants? Okay, how can institutional music organizations help each other and then collectively find ways to support smaller projects? Or how can startups help the older institutions stay relevant? So this kind of harkens back to the question that a couple of you raised earlier and I raised about or this morning we raised it, what can the larger organizations learn from smaller organizations? How can they learn from each other, and specifically how can arguably more flexible smaller organizations teach larger organizations? Who wants to take a shot at Richard?
Yeah, we brought in an improvised presenter, avant-garde presenter, The Stone, that John Zorn founded 20 years ago. We brought it into the school. We run it out of our lobby in a theater that has windows to the outside, to the street. It's street level and into the lobby, actually. And it's an unusual venue in that it was volunteer run. There was really no paid staff, and the entire gate goes directly to the artists. There's no food served. There's no drink served. You can't take any videos. Gives about 240 concerts a year, biggest name to unknowns, whether Laurie Anderson, Ryuichi Sakamoto. You could go down the list of people perform, Steve Coleman. And it has helped us. It's so centered in supporting artists and artistic freedom. There are other venues like it where you can't, you have to play the songbook to be booked into certain venues if you're a jazz artist. This is a venue that supported freedom of artists, ensuring that artists get paid immediately, ensuring that artists are treated right. And it also has a really sort of democratic structure from the very beginning. And bringing it in to an institution like this, I think has really helped us better understand what it means to respect artists, what it means to support community in direct ways, what it means to give real freedom, and what it also, oddly enough, means to create a kind of temple to music where you can't take a photo, where you don't have a waiter or a service person interrupting a great solo to give you your bill or fill your glass. And we couldn't have gotten that any other way. It was such a unique venue of a certain size and ilk, and it's fit in perfectly. So that's just one example how something could be brought in that doesn't seem like it might have been a good fit, especially with all the legal issues related, legal requirements of being at a higher education institution. So I think there's something in that kind of model and how one can feed the other.
Thanks, Richard. I'm going to go to Tim. I just should also note that Alan Brown had to leave us at 2:30. He wasn't fed up. He had to go to do something else. So we thank him for his participation. Tim.
I thought he got irritated by my optimism. Okay. I'll shout out Krishna again, because I think what smaller organizations have to teach larger organizations, like the idea of collaborative bargaining, these kinds of like cultural, organizational cultural issues. Small organizations by necessity have to have an organizational culture that's kind of like all in, and hopefully you have the kind of intimacy between members of the organization, that people trust each other and you can move quickly. And as organizations get larger, the iron law of bureaucracies takes over, and trust is hard to sustain. And I don't know, it's like big organizations look down upon the naivete of, we should just all trust each other and create together. But I actually think it's the wrong message. Big organizations tend to have also people of more advanced generations leading them. I feel like I've just crossed over into being old, and it's I've had like my own moments of realizing, all right, I have to pay very close attention to the norms and expectations of the younger people entering the workforce, because that is how the organization is going to thrive going forward. Small organizations kind of know that instinctively, in part because they tend to be nimbler, smaller, younger, etc. So that's my answer to the question.
Yeah, good. Anybody else want to weigh in on this before we go to another question?
Yeah. Sorry, Alysia.
No, go ahead.
Alysia, you unmuted. Go.
Well, I was just going to say, because so much of the duality of my work is that I run a small grassroots nonprofit organization, but then I also work, at the State Department as the leader of arts education. And so I often think about how the skills are transferring. It's important for me to understand that, like, the skills I've gained at the State Department, I couldn't get those skills at the grassroots place, but also vice versa. So there's a lot of connectivity that really needs to occur. I love the idea of large institutions really understanding the value of the bottom line proposition that a small institution brings. If we as thinking as a funder, if we start to really require all of our institutions to have direct connections in the community, a lot of visibility in the community, and also accountability structures wrapped around from the community, then we would see that grassroots organizations would win every time. So there's a lot to learn in both places. And a trend that I'm really happy to see faltering away is that when funders would want to fund collaboration of that sort, they would often filter it through the larger institution, and then it would, we all know how trickle-down economics doesn't work. So then the small institution would get pennies. So I'm happy to see that funders have found, look, we can't do that anymore, and are really instead investing in those types of collaborations, because it really does work for everyone, but in a way that also, I love, democratizes the process. So really flattening the power dynamics between the two institutions. And that's a great way for us to think. These more flattened leadership and flattened power dynamics to enter into partnership are a great model for all of us and across, all of our work. So that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you, Alysia. Krishna, did you want to say something? And now, no?
I just wanted to say what I learned from running a smaller organization is that decision-making speed is your friend when it comes to actually doing things. If you want to make only perfect decisions, you're never going to do anything right.
Gosh, that's so true. I also want to underscore something that Tim mentioned, which is, to me, so important to so much of the kinds of work we're talking about, but hasn't come up so far, which is the importance of trust. And that is totally true, that it is, I think, easier to develop in a smaller organization than a larger one. And I also just want to point out that trust, obviously, within an organization is critical. But something that I've been really learning as Alarm Will Sound has ventured into more DEI work and trying to diversify the kinds of artists that we work with in terms of the kinds of experiences that they've had and like where they come from, is that developing trust is more challenging. And that, we all grew up together, we all went to school together, we all have the same training. And so like trust comes very easily. And then it's been interesting when we work with artists who've come from really different backgrounds with really different kinds of experiences, really different ways of talking about things, that trust takes more work. And something that we've learned, it's a small organization that I feel like is probably even more true for a larger organization, is that we have to spend more time than we might initially think developing the trust, and really like thinking about developing trust as an important part of building the infrastructure, the social and human infrastructure necessary to work with artists who come from different backgrounds and bring different experience.
We talked a lot about this morning also with the panel and with the presenters about this idea, and it comes back to what Richard, we were talking about curriculum before, that even as we think about how we admit people to our programs and what how we gauge and how we judge people, right, is by a very specific set of criteria that does not encompass, a whole range of other creative expressions. And that's, we're certainly having, lots of conversation here about that. How do you change that? Okay, another question from Lauren. Do we have another question? Okay, how do we embrace the vulnerability of art and ensure that we do not hide our humanity behind traditions? It's an interesting question. How do we embrace the vulnerability of art and ensure that we do not hide our humanity around traditions? Alysia.
I can just speak to the creative process that we utilize here in Maryland. So we're so lucky in Maryland that the Department of Commerce's Maryland State Arts Council and the Department of Education's Fine Arts Office are on one accord. We work together. We use a lot of the same frameworks to talk about professional art making and also arts learning. So we're really fortunate in that way. And when we think about the creative process, we think of it as an opportunity to be vulnerable with people. We think of it as an opportunity to connect on a human level, right? The exploration of big ideas really comes from the education space, but it's language that we use when I go in with the executive director of the Star Arts Council to meet with folks to talk about how they can explore their creative process by opening it up to their community, right? Not later just at the present place, but when you're figuring out what questions are we going to grapple with this season. That's the time, right? Nobody wants to be invited to the dinner party after the entree's been served. So really try to bring people in from the very beginning when you're pulling the ingredients together. And that is vulnerable. It's risky. But as an artist, I have found it to be exciting. I just completed a commission with the Baltimore Choral Arts organization here in Baltimore, where I opened my creative process up to the choir instead of just kind of talking to them and then going back and working, but really opening up what questions was the composition going to grapple with, opening that up and making that their decision, right? And that they really led me in the process. And so just that change, that shift to get people to see behind the curtain, to see how the sausage is made, can really invite participation, which I do think is what Jake Heggie found in that magical moment of singing Happy Birthday together, where everyone's voice really added to the beauty of the moment. And it's like, man, if you weren't here, bass, everything in the room would have been different. If you weren't here, thank goodness you had that high C today. Everything would have been different about the atmosphere. And that's the kind of experience that people are really, all of us are craving. This idea of like, if I'm not there, I'm going to miss out. So, right, if I'm not there because there's something happening there, there's magic in the dust of creativity. So there's something happening there that's magical. And if I'm not in the moment, at that concert, in that space, I will miss it. And when that's not present, that human element of magic, then it's harder to draw us in to want to be there in this age where we're used to, our TVs, we decide when we get to watch our favorite shows, we decide on our iPads, what music we're going to listen to at any moment. It's harder to really draw yourself out of the house to the concert hall when that magic isn't present.
Tim, you look like you want to say something, and then Alan.
Well, I'm going to go back to my adoration of Brené Brown, because she gave us in the culture this language and concept of vulnerability so clearly. I would also like to agree with Alysia. What makes art, especially live art, is that experience of the vulnerability, the electricity that is generated when an artist is willing to be vulnerable. Both the creative artists who created the dang thing and the interpretive artists and creative artists on the stage. And there's nothing more vulnerable than doing it with your own human voice. But so let me say that it also requires us, one of the things I'm grateful to Brené Brown about is that the experience of having to be that vulnerable is part of what creates the challenging behaviors sometimes that create all kinds of issues in our organizations, and that often manifest themselves in that kind of authoritarianism that Krishna was so correctly identifying as problematic. Because I'll tell you, a terrified, vulnerable artist can often become a very hard person to work with. And you've got to understand, in my view, that what's underlying it is this terrifying vulnerability. And so we all have to develop better emotional vocabularies Got to get that person out of that space where they're channeling the fear and vulnerability into behaviors that are unacceptable. And then we've got to get everybody around us to have the kind of antibodies to understand what's going on and help somebody through that time. I think the questioner has asked the right question.
Alan, did you want to say something, and then we'll take another question?
Yeah, I think a key for this is something that Jake was talking about in his talk, which is permission to fail and learning how to deal with failure. I think that is so important on so many levels. And, Tim, you were talking about the bad behavior that can come when we're feeling vulnerable. I think, as a culture, creating a space where we have permission to fail is a tool to addressing that. I was remembering sort of early on in Alarmable Sounds work, we were doing a project with a director, and the director had this vision of a performance. We were all going to play lying down. And, like playing a cello lying flat on your back, or a bass clarinet lying flat on your back, is really hard. And like, I so admired how the group took that challenge on. And I think that the fact that worked and that was a productive challenge came from creating a space where people felt like they had permission to fail. And, I think that's key to the innovation we're talking about on so many different levels. Like, as an organization, making a space where like you can start working on a project that is unknown and innovative and questioning and experimental, and it might not work, and that's okay. And then also as artists, where the performers have a space where they can try something that is new and scary and challenging, and maybe they won't sound good. And that's okay. And maybe we discover that, no, actually, like, that doesn't work because they don't sound good. Or maybe we discover that, like, actually, like, sounding beautiful is not what's important here for the expression we're making. And making space where we can explore that together, as Joelle said, like, in a safe space, but not a comfortable space. I think that is totally key. So permission to fail and uncomfortable spaces, uncomfortable but safe spaces. I think that's what this is all about.
The theme that ran through this morning also, Brad Ballia talking about no hierarchy, risk getting it wrong, let go of your plans. Of course, we also talked about the toxic relationship between mentor and apprentice, which is, all of these things are things that our business is actually built on. Think about it, right?
And just one more thing to that.
What? Sorry,
like this like conservatories. This has to start in conservatories.
Absolutely.
And like, I'm here in my office at Northwestern University right now, and it is something like I face every day, is that the performers they're so focused on sounding beautiful all the time, and like that is a skill to learn. Yep. But it's not always what's most important. I would say it's usually not what's most important when we actually put on a show. And so creating that space here in a conservatory where the students have permission to fail, I think that's so important.
Critical. Okay, another question, Lauren. Here we go. There is a common theme of discomfort around growth. Why do you think that is, and do you believe that being uncomfortable is necessary for change? Oh, well, I would say a resounding yes to that, but that's me. Who wants to go on that? Richard, and then everybody's going to want to say something about this. Richard?
I have come to this conclusion the hard way, that growth only occurs during discomfort. It's in my life, in my relationships, in my professional life. Those who are always comfortable are probably avoiding. And it is grappling with the issues that allows you to grow. It is moving through things. So I think that, I think that this is just the most fundamental thing in terms of talk about humanity, being a human being. It is necessary to be able to understand this. And, it's hard because any number of us, we've all been in these situations where we kind of wish we could back out of a conversation, a moment. It's uncomfortable to drag. You're like, wow, can't I just leave and get a cup of coffee? But if, you're an adult and you really want to move forward, you stick with it and hopefully progress is made.
Anybody else want to speak to this? We've talked quite a lot. Actually,
I don't want to sound quip here, but I think if you go into a project, whether it's artistic or non-artistic in life, if you go into a phase of something in life and you have all the answers, then it's probably not worth doing. And you know, we keep talking about this like we're in the pursuit of excellence. We're really not. We're in the pursuit of humanity. And to understand humanity, we have to stretch our horizons every day just a little bit in order to get to what we want.
But that's another, when we talk about sacred cows, talking about structures, we're talking about, hierarchy, we're talking about all these things, and you talk about that goes to the core actually of those issues, I think.
I'll quote a line from an opera, the Fire Shut Up in My Bones libretto, which began at the Opera Theater of St. Louis. And I remember getting the libretto from K.C. Lemons. And there's a line in it where the character of Charles Blow's uncle is teaching him how to plant seeds. And he says, you've got to disturb the earth for things to grow. And so I think that says it.
Yeah. And this is a really hard issue, I think, particularly for institutions. We all manage change, right, in larger institutions, and it is and certain institutions are more used to it than others, nonetheless. But it's a constant challenge, I think. Yeah, Alan.
Yes, to everything that's been said here. I think for all the reasons already spoken of, discomfort is essential for growth and change. I'll add one more thing to that, which is that as you get older, I think that becomes more of a thing. And it was been interesting for me, when we were all graduating school in the late 90s and early 2000s, and to see all the things that our colleagues a generation older were uncomfortable with, that we thought, oh yeah, no big deal, talking about the music you play and selling it to an audience, singing or speaking as part of a concert rather than just playing your instrument. These are all things that why are older musicians so uncomfortable with this stuff? This is what we do. And it's been interesting as we have gotten older to discover that there are things that a younger generation of musicians is doing more naturally that are more uncomfortable for us. And that we have to continually challenge ourselves. And I forget who, I think it was Tim who was talking about the importance of staying connected to what a new generation of musicians is doing and of listeners are interested in. And I think that it is easy as you get older and you've been doing it for a long time and you have your way of doing it to start to become ossified. And it is really incumbent on us as artists, as we get older, to keep challenging ourselves and keep making ourselves uncomfortable. And know that is a sign of doing the work that we need to do to stay relevant and stay connected and keep growing.
So I want to see if we can maybe squeeze in a couple more questions. Lauren, how can you perfect your craft to be of service to the community? Jake talked about being of service. We all talk about this in terms of community engagement. We're certainly trying to teach that here. I would ask the question even, how do you get artists to recognize that this is actually important? Because I think some do and some don't. So I would start there actually, but I'll open it up now to the group. Yeah, Alysia?
Well, I know when I did the Sistema Fellowship at New England Conservatory, there was a grueling week where we were exploring a case, looking at the Oakland Symphony, and we were asked to, present this kind of, pitch around how music could be transformative in this community. And all of us as musicians, we came in with our same, very similar stories about the power of music. Music is, music, yeah, it's so great. It'll transform everyone's lives if they have access and all of this other stuff. I am one of the musicians that I really, and I invite people to disagree with me, but I really do not believe that music itself, for me, has been transformative. All of my musical transformative experiences have been wrapped up in the relationships and the experiences I have with other people. That's just my experience. And what the teacher who was teaching us, this Harvard business professor, she slapped each of us on the wrist and sent us back to our desks, just feeling shame. She said, you guys are so used to, because it's intrinsic to you to feel the joy for music, that you're not even seeing how the first piece, if you want to be in service to someone else, is to prioritize what they need, not what you need, right? And so, we thought we were being these great evangelicals of music making, but what we were really doing was kind of being snobbish in our approach to not really understanding the humanity, the way to connect with someone and to have a connection is not to have this kind of transactional experience. I will offer you, lucky you, the opportunity to experience my music making, but instead to have something that feels more transformative, something that's much more balanced on both sides, where both of us walk away with a deeper understanding. And when I started to look back at my own cultural musical experiences, I found that, you know, the people I sang in choir with in high school, I was in their weddings. I'm the godmother to their children, right? Without music, my life would be hollow. But for me, it's because of the people and the things that I've done in service of music itself. So I know not everyone thinks that way about music making. For some people, just the music alone is transformative, but it offers to me an opportunity. It offers me an opportunity to think about how I can bring people together through music making, not just by hearing the music, but also by participating in it and by making sure that the musical experience is an opportunity, if it's ever going to become at any point in the creative process, an opportunity just for people to observe, that they're observing something that they really can respond to and react to with zeal and vigor, right? So like whatever the questions are that we're exploring on stage, that when we turn it back out, everyone's not just like, I don't know, I guess it's important. People are like, this is the most important question for our community today, right? How are we dealing with food scarcity is the most important question. Or what's going on with the mail? Right? Whatever those questions are, big and small, and we can't assume what the questions for any one community will be. But that's how I've really tried to think about, and thank goodness for that hand slap, just to shift my perspective to really think about a dialogue that can begin between me and others.
Richard.
Well, just to expand on that a little bit, add some history to it, the earliest kinds of outreach, especially the way like a lot of money was started to be put into it in the 60s, 70s, 80s, it was a hegemonal form. It really was the idea that it was acculturation. And even, the Edward Murrow recordings, educational recordings and things like that in the 40s, 50s were about that. It was like, let's foist, this culture and this form onto the masses, and that we will improve them. And, that was a sort of prevailing, a lot of I worked for, as Fred knows, I worked for one of his orchestras years ago as a consultant. I worked for a lot of cultural organizations at a point in my career. And that was behind, especially from the board perspective, a big part of what people were looking at in terms of education in the 80s, 90s, and maybe even into the 2000s. And that's really turned upside down. And the idea that you cannot and should not go into a community and sort of think you're going to sort of superimpose your value system into this community. And so what's happened is, I think it's really sort of up the ante in ways in which you have to ask questions about who people are. That you as an artist, you as a teaching artist, you as a community-oriented or socially oriented person, you probably need to be more interested in the people that you're going to engage with than yourself. So, if you can't do that, you're going to have a problem in terms of your craft and the community.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anybody else want to? Kim?
Well, I'll just say, so I agree again with Alysia. It is, I love music more than anybody I know, but I don't think it's about music. It is about, music is not the end, it is the means. And the end is exactly what Alysia said: relationships, connection, understanding, quality of living, humanity. And I actually think we who have organizations that we're responsible for the missions of have to be clear about this. So, you can say that like strategic planning is a thing of the past. Well, strategic planning helps you have that opportunity with all the stakeholders to say, what is the mission of this organization, right? And to confront exactly what Richard was just describing. I always had a simple answer. We were the Opera Theater of St. Louis. So it's a community organization that has the mission to produce opera for the benefit of the community and its connections. Now I run the Washington National Opera. That's even more confusing. But whenever we have a first rehearsal, I say to the assembled cast, the mission of the Washington National Opera at the Kennedy Center, like the Kennedy Center is a monument to John F. Kennedy. We have the mission to represent like the greatest hopes and dreams of the American people through artistic expression. Like, let's not be confused about why we have the privilege to do this. It's not for the music itself. It's for the benefit of our culture and our communities. So I think it's helpful to be clear about the means and the ends.
So, colleagues, we have just hit 3 o'clock. I have no doubt that we could go on for another 3 hours, actually. I mean, we're barely scratching the surface, but is a really great conversation. And I really thank you for your, really just thoughtful, substantive, candid, comments, about these really important questions. So thanks to all of you and to folks that have tuned in throughout the day. We've got some groups coming up, discussion groups that are going to go on for the rest of the afternoon, but it's been a really, really fascinating day around us. This is some really important questions. So thanks to all of you for participating.
Thank you.